five things to consider, and I think these apply also to other theosophical groups. He states that the five most important aspects to consider are, firstly, tradition, secondly, modernization, thirdly, communication, fourthly, consultation, and fifthly, global participation. Let's briefly consider each of these five aspects and see how this might relate to the ongoing relevance of the theosophical work in the world. So, firstly, looking at tradition. It's very important for the current theosophical movement to find a balance between the progression and the preservation of tradition. So no one is advocating that tradition should be outright abandoned, because tradition is there for a reason. Tradition is significant. Without tradition, we can lose the foundation, the very foundation on which our various organizations were founded on, and on which the movement itself was founded. However, the theosophical movement inherently has always been non-dogmatic in its approach to the questions of life and the teachings we have inherited. The theosophical movement has never been afraid of evolution or change because it understands these things to be in the natural way of things, in the natural way of everything in life. And so it's significant and important that every theosophist must remain entirely free to accept or to reject whatever teaching they wish, and further free to act in accordance with the guidance of their own conscience. So there is no tradition set down in theosophy that is said to be the final dogma or the one and only way of doing things. It is okay to have a diversity of opinions and perspectives and interpretations of these things. And in fact, such diversity in an understanding of the theosophical teachings provides us with the richness of our theosophical movement, and perhaps sometimes helps us to question our own understandings and our own prejudices that might arise. However, as a movement, it's also important to remember our roots. And so a respect for tradition does assist us in keeping close to mind the movement's original objectives. It helps us to prevent us from becoming too distracted or to wander off on the wrong path. So it's perhaps an anchor which keeps us going in the right direction and returns us to the original purpose for this movement in the modern world. Secondly, to think about modernization. And so this is particularly relevant to youth, and the first sentence here is because this was presented to the Theosophical Youth Forum in Adyar. So some of it I haven't quite adapted. But yes, we are raised from childhood to have this familiarity with modern technology and social media and the broader digital revolution. And so for youth, it's particularly important that theosophy is now presented in a modern, convenient, technological way, because this is the way that people are learning everything currently. So while some members of the youth still very much enjoy perhaps picking up a hardback book and reading it, or I do myself, I think most of the youth now prefer to study online, to study through ebooks, to watch videos perhaps, or audio. All these sorts of things tend to be the way of the modern world and the way that education is progressing and evolving. So it's important that theosophy keeps up with these changes as well. And again, theosophy as the ageless wisdom is unchanging, but the medium whereby it is presented to the world must necessarily change and modernize and adapt. And so I think there are many tools that we can use as theosophists to enrich our understanding and our connections with others. And this is particularly relevant to young members of the theosophical movement. But nowadays, there are many theosophical email lists, social media, films or YouTube videos, PowerPoint presentations, such as what we're doing today, online seminars, now called webinars, and courses, websites, electronic books. All of these are accessible to everyone who wants to access them. And so by engaging with the youth, these kind of media become necessary. If the Theosophical movement can continue to evolve in line with the developments of modern technology, then youth will naturally find themselves attracted towards such a modern expression of theosophy. And we find in the Theosophical Society, particularly in the Philippine and the American sections, that there has been a lot of great work in terms of bringing this to the internet. So there are many online courses available, many online webinars, similar to these study groups that are taking place through the Temple of the People. These sort of things are also taking place in various sections of the Theosophical Society. And it's interesting. This presentation I made was a few years ago, before this pandemic that is facing us all now. But it's interesting how this pandemic has forced us online, isn't it? It sort of forced us to modernize our way of interacting with each other and having these meetings. But hopefully there's some learning that can be taken out of that. Hopefully once things go back to normal, there will continue to be an online element, or there will continue to be a utilization of technology, because this does bring theosophy into the future, and it does bring it to a much wider audience than it otherwise would. And there are many people out there who are theosophists, in the sense that they have an inkling of these ideas and they have a sense of these realities, but they may not have any ability or any understanding of the various groups that are out there. They may not understand or be aware of the existence of these groups and of the teachings. And so by bringing this to the internet and using technology, we are able to perhaps reach out to these isolated seekers after truth and bring them into the theosophical fold. So communication is another big one, and very briefly considering this. So we need to keep in mind here the first object of the Theosophical Society, that being to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity. And in trying to bring this to fulfillment, we must necessarily have ongoing communication with our fellow theosophists, both on the local, national, and on the international level. And so this also ties in with our utilization of technology. And nowadays, there's many ways to effectively accomplish this. Tools such as Facebook, tools such as email or YouTube, all of these are great ways to share resources, to stay in touch with other members of the organization, or stay in touch with other theosophical friends. Also, inter-lodge or inter-group activities. Inter-group activities are another great way to bring people together. Something that we tried in the Theosophical Society in the Philippines, which was very successful, was when we had more developed lodges or groups that would help struggling or slightly less organized lodges through sharing materials, through offering suggested schedules, through showing. So when you consider the when one lodge shares its success with another lodge and shows how they were able to become an established group, this can be really helpful in terms of other branches or other groups, especially smaller groups or groups which may have fallen into inactivity. Inter-group activities are great, perhaps a coming together, and I from my understanding, there is a sort of a convention in the Temple of the People as well. But these kinds of conventions are great because they give a chance for people who might be more isolated or unable to participate in regular group activity. It gives them a chance to come together once a year or so to again touch base with the headquarters, or touch base with the spiritual center of these activities. And so it's helpful to remember that while some individuals might be separated by distance, that each group and each individual forms in the end a single whole. In the development of such a consciousness of unity, we may arrive closer to that ideal of universal brotherhood. So in terms of consultation, I think it's important to be able to share ideas and perspectives, because what works for one group might work very well for another group. So, that's very much what I'm doing here today. I'm sharing some of the things which have worked for the Theosophical Society, and maybe they will work well for the Temple of the People too. Maybe they won't, and that's okay. There might be something here that you take from this and which you put into use, or there might be some ideas which might get you thinking of some other ideas which might be helpful in that respect. Or you may find that these ideas are not necessary, but that's okay. It's just the sharing of ideas which is beneficial, just in case any of this is helpful for any groups out there. And I think groups shouldn't hesitate to approach one another for assistance or advice or help. I think this kind of fluid and free sharing of ideas is very important in the Theosophical movement. I think it's also great to appreciate talent when it's discovered, to try and listen to the voices of all who wish to share their ideas and perspectives. I think one thing that the Theosophical movement is great at is its appreciation for everyone's values and talents, that everyone who participates in the work of the Theosophical movement has some part to play. Everyone has their own strengths or areas in which they may best be of service. And I think the Theosophical movement is very welcoming of people, regardless of their backgrounds or of their particular skill sets, very welcoming of people to assist in the work. And I think it should continue in that way. So, also in terms, finally, of global participation, I think it's important to remember that the Theosophical movement is a global movement. It's not simply an organization relevant to America or to India or to England or whatever. It is truly global, and that ties in with the Theosophical worldview of the unity of all life and of the fact that Theosophy has been disseminated throughout the various cultures and religions, each in a unique way. Because of this, we have a deep appreciation for every culture, for every religion, and every expression of this ageless wisdom, and that ties into the fact that it is really a global movement. And it's important, therefore, to find efficient ways to function in an international capacity. And I know that the Temple of the People is international also and has a few branches in other countries. And so we find in nature this evidence of the interrelatedness of all life. This is often termed the butterfly effect, where even the fluttering of a butterfly's wing can cause other changes in nature, small changes which then become bigger changes, and so on and on, until eventually it causes a change on a global or a cosmic level. And this is very much in line with the Theosophical understanding of karma, or cause and effect. And so we know that every part has some impact or influence on every other part. And this applies very much to organizations. Every aspect of the organization matters. Every unit of the organization matters. And so every individual seeker, every member of the movement has a part to play, and their actions affect, necessarily through this principle of karma, they affect the group as a whole. So we need to try and function as a truly global movement. And in terms of the different groups, the Theosophical Society, the various Theosophical Societies, the Temple of the People, the ULT, and so on, this can even just be through some friendly communication. I do think it's very helpful to share some of our ideas with one another, to occasionally come together, to have meetings such as what we're having today, and such as what happened a few years ago at the International Convention of the Theosophical Society. I think it's really great to see a coming together of theosophic minds to discuss the continuing relevance of our movement. This can also help to foster a sense of fellowship, because while we may be separate in an organizational sense, we understand that we are unified in our fundamental nature, in the sense of forming a part of a universal brotherhood, which is the more important aspect of this. So to conclude what we've talked about today, I do think the Theosophical movement remains as relevant today as when it began in 1875. But its future depends largely on the preservation of its traditions, whilst, like